hunger drives a desperate mother to beg, only to be turned away by a greedy merchant. But when a mysterious rancher leans close and whispers a scandalous offer, a simple trip for groceries becomes a deadly game of revenge. Welcome to a true story of survival, betrayal, and untamed justice. Evangeline Rutledge stood frozen in the center of Phineas Grimes' mercantile, the rough-hewn floorboards creaking beneath her worn leather boots. The air inside the store was thick with the intoxicating scents of roasted coffee beans, cured tobacco, and salted pork smells that made her empty stomach twist into painful knots. It had been 3 days since she or her 7-year-old son, Charlie, had eaten anything more substantial than watered-down cornmeal mush. The brutal winter of 1884 had bled into an unforgiving, drought-stricken spring in the New Mexico Territory, and Evangeline's luck had evaporated along with the rain. Since the sudden, mysterious death of her husband, William, 6 months prior, the small ranch they had built together on the edge of the Pecos Valley had been systematically starved out. The cattle had vanished in the night, the fences had been cut, and the town's sympathy had dried up the moment her pockets went empty. She tightened her grip on the woven handle of her basket, her knuckles turning white, and forced herself to step up to the polished mahogany counter. Phineas Grimes, a man whose tailored silk vests and oiled hair stood in stark contrast to the dust-choked reality of the frontier, looked up from his ledger. His eyes, the color of dirty ice, raked over her faded gingham dress, and the desperate exhaustion etched into her features. "Mrs. Rutledge," Grimes drawled, not bothering to remove the unlit cigar from the corner of his mouth. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to finally settle William's accounts." "Mr. Grimes," Evangeline began, her voice trembling before she forced steel into her spine. "I need supplies. Just a sack of flour, some beans, and a bit of bacon. I'll sign a promissory note against the autumn harvest. I swear it on my life." Grimes let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed through the quiet store. A few other patrons, including the town's formidable busybody, Beatrice Wallace, and the notoriously corrupt Mayor Tiago Bandon, paused their conversations to watch the spectacle. "The autumn harvest," Grimes mocked, slamming his ledger shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense room. "Your land is barren, Evangeline. Your husband left you with nothing but dirt and a mountain of debt. You already owe me $80. I am a businessman, not a charity ward for helpless widows." "Please," she whispered, the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck as Beatrice Wallace let out an audible, disapproving tsk. "My boy is hungry. I just need a week's worth of food. I'll take in washing. I'll mend clothes. There is only one thing of value you possess, Mrs. Rutledge," Grimes interrupted, leaning heavily over the counter, his voice dropping to a predatory murmur. "The deed to that plot of land out by the canyon. Sign it over to me right now, and I'll let you fill your basket. Refuse, and you can watch your boy starve. The choice is yours." Tears of helpless rage pricked Evangeline's eyes. A land with the last piece of William she had left. It was Charlie's inheritance. Giving it to Grimes meant utter destitution. It meant becoming a vagrant in a land that chewed up and spat out the weak. "I won't give you my husband's land," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Then get out of my store," Grimes sneered, waving a dismissive hand. "And don't come back until you're ready to be reasonable." Evangeline turned, the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on her shoulders. The whispers of the onlookers felt like physical blows. She had failed. She didn't know how she was going to look Charlie in the eyes and tell him there was no supper. Again, she was halfway to the batwing doors when a shadow blocked the harsh afternoon sun. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, blocking the exit with an imposing quiet stillness. His boots, coated in a thick layer of red trail dust, ended in silver spurs that gave a soft, ominous jingle as he shifted his weight. A low-crowned Stetson was pulled down, shadowing his eyes, but Evangeline could see the hard, uncompromising line of his jaw covered in dark stubble. A Colt Peacemaker rested casually on his hip, the worn leather holster speaking of heavy, frequent use. He didn't move to let her pass. Instead, he stepped closer. The scent of pine, leather, and horses washed over her, replacing the stifling odors of the mercantile. The stranger looked past her, fixing a terrifyingly cold stare on Phineas Grimes, who visibly swallowed, losing some of his arrogant posture. Then the stranger looked down at Evangeline. He reached out, his gloved hand lightly touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of old-world respect that seemed entirely out of place in this cruel town. He leaned in close. His breath was warm against the chill of her despair, and his voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Don't give that snake an inch of your dirt," he whispered. His words meant only for her. "Ride with me, I'll fill your table tonight," Evangeline gasped, stepping back. The proposition was scandalous. In 1884, a widow riding off with a strange man was a one-way ticket to ruining whatever shredded reputation she had left. Beatrice Wallace was already stretching her neck to see what was happening. I don't even know you," Evangeline stammered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Was he offering a trade, the kind of dark, desperate trade women on the frontier were sometimes forced to make? "The name is Wade Coulter," he said, his eyes finally catching the light. They were a piercing, turbulent gray, "and I owe William a debt. One that's long past due. Bring your boy to the Widow Wallace's for the afternoon. Then meet me at the livery. Trust me, Mrs. Rutledge. By sundown your pantry will be full, and Phineas Grimes will be the one begging." Before she could form a reply, Wade Coulter stepped around her, tossed a silver dollar onto the counter to pay for a tin of peaches he hadn't even picked up, and walked out into the glaring sun. Evangeline stood paralyzed for a moment, her mind racing. It was madness to trust him. It was reckless. But as her stomach gave another painful lurch, she realized she had absolutely nothing left to lose. Evangeline left Charlie in the reluctant care of Beatrice Wallace, trading her last heirloom, a delicate silver cameo brooch, for the woman's silence and a promise to feed the boy a hot bowl of stew. With her son temporarily safe, she marched toward the town's livery stable, her pulse drumming a frantic rhythm in her ears. Wade Coulter was waiting in the shadows of the barn, saddling a massive roan gelding. Beside it stood a gentle-looking gray mare, already saddled and waiting for her. "You came," Wade noted, pulling the cinch tight with a practiced jerk. "I don't have a choice, Mr. Coulter," Evangeline said, her tone defensive. "But let me make one thing perfectly clear. I am a desperate woman, but I am not a woman for sale. If your offer of filling my table implies anything untoward." Wade stopped, turning to look at her fully. The harshness in his face softened for a fraction of a second, revealing a profound, unexpected sadness. "Mrs. Passel Rutledge, I rode with your husband 5 years ago down in Sonora. William saved my life when a rogue steer nearly trampled me to death. He was the most honorable man I ever knew. I ain't here to compromise his widow. I'm here to expose a murder." The word hung in the dusty air of the livery like a death knell. "Murder," Evangeline breathed, the blood draining from her face. "William died of a sudden fever. Doc Harper said his heart just gave out." "Doc Harper is in Mayor Bandon's pocket, and the mayor is the strings attached to Phineas Grimes," Wade said grimly, handing her the reins of the gray mare. "William didn't die of no fever. Mount up. You need to see this with your own eyes." They rode out of town, heading west, away from the flat scrubland and toward the jagged, imposing limestone bluffs of the Diablo Canyon. The silence between them was heavy, filled only with the rhythmic thud of hooves and the occasional cry of a red-tailed hawk circling in the thermal updrafts. Evangeline's mind was a maelstrom of confusion, grief, and a slowly kindling fire of rage. If what Wade said was true, her entire year of suffering, the tears she had shed over her husband's grave, the starvation she and Charlie were enduring, it was all engineered. After 2 hours of hard riding, the terrain grew treacherous. Wade guided them off the main trail, navigating through a narrow, brush-choked ravine that seemed entirely impassable, until they suddenly broke through into a hidden, expansive box canyon. Evangeline pulled back on her reins, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. The canyon was teeming with life. A pristine, crystal-clear spring bubbled from the rock face, feeding a lush patch of grazing grass. And grazing on that grass were no less than 200 head of prime, healthy cattle. But it wasn't the sheer volume of livestock that made Evangeline's breath catch in her throat. It was the brands, those. She pointed, her hand shaking violently. That's the Flying R. Those are William's cattle, the ones that disappeared the night he died. Grimes claimed they must have wandered off and died in the Badlands. Grimes is a rustler in a silk vest, Wade growled, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. He and his hired guns drove them out here the exact same night they poisoned your husband's whiskey. Evangeline stumbled, her knees turning to water. Wade caught her arm, his grip firm and steadying. She stared at her cattle. The wealth that should have kept her and Charlie comfortable for years was standing right in front of her, hidden away in a secret gorge. Why? She choked out, tears of absolute fury finally spilling over her lashes. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just steal them and sell them? Why kill William? Why try to take my land? Thou. Because of the water, Evangeline, Wade explained, stepping forward to look over the herd. This spring is the only reliable water source within 50 miles that hasn't dried up in this drought. And the only way to drive cattle in and out of this hidden canyon is through the eastern pass. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes dark with intensity. And the eastern pass sits directly in the middle of your property. The pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. Grimes didn't care about the $80 she owed him. He didn't care about her small cabin. He needed the deed to the Rutledge land so he could control the pass, giving him exclusive legal access to the hidden spring and a perfect staging ground for stolen cattle. William must have discovered what they were doing. He must have confronted them. He found out, Evangeline whispered, staring at the rippling water. William found this place. He was going to expose them. And they silenced him, Wade confirmed softly. I got a letter from him 2 weeks before he died. He said he found something dirty in the canyon and asked me to come up and watch his bag. I was in Texas. By the time I got the letter and rode up here, I was 6 months too late. Wade walked over to his saddlebags and pulled out a heavy canvas sack. He dropped it at Evangeline's feet. It clinked with the heavy, unmistakable sound of silver and gold coins. I sold 30 head of my own cattle before I rode into town today, Wade said. That's $1,000, Evangeline. More than enough to pay off Grimes, secure your land, and buy enough food to fill your table for the next 5 years. Evangeline looked at the sack of money, then up at Wade. Her tears had stopped. In their place was a cold, unfamiliar hardness. The desperate, begging widow who had walked into the mercantile that afternoon was gone, burned away by the devastating truth. No, Evangeline said, her voice eerily calm. Paying him off means he gets away with it. It means William's murderers keep drinking their fine liquor and running this town while my husband rots in the ground. Wade smiled, a slow, dangerous curving of his lips that held no warmth. He reached into his saddle scabbard and pulled out a gleaming Winchester repeating rifle. He held it out to her, handle first. I was hoping you'd say that, Wade murmured. Like I said in the store, Mrs. Rutledge, time to collect your debts. We ride back at twilight, and we aren't asking for groceries this time. The cold, heavy steel of the Winchester rifle felt entirely foreign in Evangeline's hands, yet a strange electric current of empowerment coursed through her veins. She ran her thumb over the smooth walnut stock, her eyes locked on the horizon where the sun was beginning its bloody descent behind the jagged limestone bluffs. The desperate, begging widow had died in that canyon. In her place stood a woman forged by the harsh realities of the New Mexico territory. We can't just ride in guns blazing, Mr. Tile. Colt her, Evangeline stated, her voice remarkably steady as she handed the rifle back to him to slide into the leather scabbard. Mayor Tiago Bandon has 3 deputies on the payroll, and Phineas Grimes has a dozen ranch hands who double as hired guns. They'll slaughter us before we reach the mercantile steps. Wade swung up onto his massive roan, his silver spurs catching the dying light. I know. I fought men like Grimes before cowards who hide behind ledger books and bought badges. We don't fight them in the street, we fight them in the dark, and we strip away the one thing keeping this town under their boot, their secrets. He pulled his horse alongside hers, the scent of leather and horse sweat mingling with the cool evening breeze. Before I rode up to your cabin today, I sent a telegram to Fort Smith. I wired Deputy U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves. He's a real lawman, incorruptible, and he's been hunting a rustling ring moving cattle across the territorial line. I gave him the coordinates to the Diablo Canyon. Reeves and his posse will be here by tomorrow morning. Evangeline's breath hitched. Bass Reeves was a living legend on the frontier, a man whose name struck terror into the hearts of outlaws from the Indian Territory all the way to the Mexican border. If Reeves saw the stolen cattle bearing the flying R brand, Grimes and Bandon would hang. But tomorrow morning might be too late, Evangeline realized, a knot tightening in her stomach. If Grimes' men saw you riding with me, if they suspect you know about the canyon, they'll move the herd tonight under the cover of darkness. They'll butcher the ones they can't move and burn the hides. The evidence will be gone. Wade gave a grim nod. Exactly. That's why we have to keep them in town tonight. And we need a paper trail. Grimes keeps a second set of books, the real ledger. A man that greedy writes everything down, the bribes to Doc Harper, the payoffs to the deputies, the altered deeds. It'll be in the safe in the back office of his mercantile. You secure the ledger, and I'll make sure Grimes and his men are too busy to notice you're there. The plan was reckless, bordering on suicidal, but it was the only way to ensure William's death had not been in vain. They rode back toward town under the cloak of a moonless night. The frontier landscape, usually so beautiful, now felt menacing, full of shifting shadows and unseen eyes. They tied their horses in a dense thicket of cottonwoods a quarter-mile outside the town limits. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and stale whiskey from the saloons on the main street. The mercantile is locked up tight at this hour, Wade whispered, checking the cylinder of his Colt peacemaker. I'll start a fire in the empty livery stable at the far end of town. The whole town, including Grimes' men, will rush to put it out before it spreads to the saloons. In the chaos, you slip through the alley, break the glass on the back door of the store, and get that ledger. Can you do it? Evangeline thought of Charlie, asleep on Beatrice Wallace's floor. She thought of William, gasping for his final breaths in their small cabin. I'll get it, she bowed. Wade reached out, his gloved hand gently cupping her jaw. The gesture was surprisingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence they were about to unleash. Be fast, Evangeline, and be careful. If things go wrong, you run. Don't look back for me. Before she could process the sudden warmth in her chest, Wade melted into the shadows, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a cougar. Evangeline crept through the darkness, navigating the trash-strewn alleys behind the main thoroughfare. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. 10 minutes later, a sudden bright orange glow illuminated the night sky, followed by the frantic ringing of the town's alarm bell. Men began shouting, boots pounding against the wooden boardwalks as the cry of "Fire!" echoed through the dusty streets. Seizing her moment, Evangeline wrapped her shawl around a heavy stone and smashed it against the glass pane of the mercantile's back door. The shattering sound was swallowed by the chaos outside. She reached through, unlatched the heavy iron bolt and slipped inside. The store was eerily quiet, smelling of spices and impending dew. She moved behind the mahogany counter, heading straight for the back office. The door was ajar. She struck a sulfur match, shielding the flame with her hand, and cast the flickering light around the cramped room. There it was. The heavy iron safe sat in the corner. To her absolute shock, it was already wide open. Looking for this, Mrs. Wright. Rutledge. The voice slithered out from the darkness like a rattlesnake. A lantern flared to life, blinding her momentarily. As her eyes adjusted, the blood froze in her veins. Phineas Grimes was sitting behind his desk, a smug, venomous smile twisting his lips. He held a thick, black, leather-bound ledger in his left hand. In his right, resting casually on the desk, was a cocked Smith & Wesson revolver pointed directly at her chest. Standing beside him was Mayor Thiago Bandon, his face flushed with nervous sweat, clutching a double-barreled shotgun. "Did you honestly think I didn't have men watching the canyon?" Grimes chuckled, standing up slowly. "My spotter saw you and your drifter friend ride up there this afternoon. I knew you'd come for the books. You always were too smart for your own good, Evangeline." It's exactly what got William killed. A sickening twist of betrayal and horror washed over her. It was a trap, and Wade was out there, alone, walking right into it. "Drop the match, Evangeline," Grimes ordered smoothly. "Mayor Bandon, go round up the deputies. Tell them we caught a desperate widow trying to rob the mercantile. A tragic accident occurred during her apprehension. Then we hunt down Mr. Coulter." Bandon nodded, his eyes darting nervously toward the front of the store. But before the mayor could take a single step, the heavy oak front doors of the mercantile exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and broken hinges. Wade Coulter stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the distant glow of the fire. He looked like an avenging angel, smoke clinging to his duster, a Winchester rifle braced against his shoulder. He hadn't gone to the livery. He had known Grimes would be waiting. "Nobody is hunting anybody," Wade's voice boomed, chilling the room. Panic erupted. Bandon panicked, swinging the shotgun toward the doorway. Wade fired, the deafening crack of the Winchester shattering the mercantile's front windows. The bullet hit the stock of Bandon's shotgun, tearing it from his hands and sending the mayor crashing to the floor, screaming in pain from his shattered wrist. Grimes spun, leveling his revolver at Wade, but Evangeline didn't hesitate. Survival instinct overrode her fear. She lunged forward, grabbing the heavy cast-iron scale from the desk and hurling it at Grimes' head. The metal clipped his shoulder, throwing his aim wildly off course. His shot blew a hole in the ceiling, raining plaster down upon them. Before Grimes could recock his weapon, Wade closed the distance. He didn't fire again. Instead, he swung the heavy butt of the Winchester like a club, catching Grimes squarely in the jaw. The corrupt merchant collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, out cold before he hit the floorboards. Silence descended on the room, broken only by Bandon's pathetic whimpering and the ringing in Evangeline's ears. Wade stepped over Grimes' unconscious body and walked straight to Evangeline. He dropped the rifle, pulling her into his chest. She buried her face in his dusty coat, her hands shaking violently as the adrenaline began to recede. "I told you," Wade whispered into her hair, his own breathing ragged. "We fight them in the dark." The next morning, the town awoke to a sight that would be etched into local lore for a century. Phineas Grimes and Mayor Thiago Bandon were chained to the hitching post outside the smoldering ruins of the mercantile. Standing over them, looking as immovable as a mountain, was Deputy U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves, flanked by 6 heavily armed federal possemen. Reeves, a towering figure with a thick mustache and eyes that missed absolutely nothing, held Grimes' black ledger in his large hands. The townspeople, including a shocked Beatrice Wallace, gathered in the street, murmuring in disbelief as the scope of the corruption was laid bare. Conspiracy, grand theft, extortion, and the murder of William Rutledge. Marshal Reeves read off the charges in a booming, authoritative voice that brooked no argument. He looked down at the bleeding, defeated Grimes. "You men are going to hang in Fort Smith, and the Lord Almighty won't have mercy on your souls." Evangeline stood on the boardwalk, watching justice finally take root in the dusty soil. The deed to her land was safe in her pocket, officially cleared of all fraudulent debts by the marshal himself. The flying R herd was being rounded up by Reeves's men to be returned to her pastures. She felt a presence beside her. Wade leaned against the wooden post, holding a burlap sack over his shoulder. "Marshal Reeves says he doesn't need my testimony for a few weeks," Wade said, his gray eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Figured I'd stick around until then. Help you drive those cattle back to the canyon. Fix up your fences." Evangeline looked at him, seeing past the rugged, dangerous exterior to the profoundly loyal man beneath. He had risked his life for a debt to a dead friend, and in doing so, had given her and Charlie their lives back. "I'd like that, Mr. Coulter." She smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that hadn't graced her face in a year. Wade smiled back. Shifting the heavy burlap sack, he opened the top, revealing cured bacon, a large sack of white flour, fresh coffee beans, and 3 tins of sweet peaches. "I made a promise yesterday," Wade murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "Told you if you rode with me, I'd fill your table. Reckon it's time we go pick up Charlie and get to cooking." As they walked down the sun-baked street together, away from the chains and the judgment, Evangeline knew the frontier would never be easy. The droughts would come again, and the winters would be bitter. But she was no longer a victim of the Wild West. She was a survivor, and for the first time since William's death, her future was entirely her own. If the grit and untamed justice of Evangeline's true frontier survival story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the trail end here. Hit that like button, share this incredible piece of hidden history with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling real-life tales from the Wild West. Ring the bell so you never miss a ride into the unknown.